Hey everyone, it's Toni Gatlin from redpentravelers.com. Today I want to talk with you and show you several different kinds of leather so that you will have good information and be able to make an educated decision when you are buying a traveler's notebook. Different makers will have different suppliers and different techniques, so some things are going to vary from maker to maker, but there are some consistent leather terms and kinds of leather that you'll want to know about so that you will have the correct expectations for the product that you're ordering, and nobody gets surprised down the road when something's like, oh, that's not what I thought it would be. So let's start with just the different kinds of leather. The leather that I use is called vegetable tanned, and it's just called that because they use plant extracts rather than synthetic chemicals or oil products, things like that, to tan the leather. So it's treated with things that are extracted from trees and leaves, that sort of thing, and they take that raw cowhide and finish it with the plant extracts. The leather that I use is from Europe, and so it's typically very smooth and clean. It's a really high quality leather. Sometimes I'll go to the leather store and I'll see some of the maybe rougher pieces of leather that have a lot of scars or even insect bites or brands, things like that. But typically my European leather is super high quality and does not have a lot of range marks. So it gives me a really neutral surface that's very smooth and allows me to create designs on the cover and not have a lot of variation in terms of texture and scarring. They're going to be really consistent. There are also always going to be some natural variations, but they're minimized when you start with a really consistent piece of leather like this. So there is something that I want everybody to be aware of, and I am sure that there is some law of physics or some scientific term that will explain this phenomenon, but let me demonstrate what I'm talking about. So I've got a piece of paper that I just pulled right out of my printer. It is, just a plain piece of white paper. It's soft and floppy because it's big and it's very thin. So it has a lot of what I call flop. It has flop. So if I take it and make it smaller, just cut it down to, sort of approximating business card size, that flop has disappeared. It's still flexible, but it doesn't just fold right over on itself the way a big thin piece would. And imagine if this was even thicker. Say this was a piece of cardstock or cardboard. Even more so, it would be very stiff. So the thicker it is and the smaller it is, that's going to affect how floppy any material is. Think about, a piece of metal, anything like that, a long piece of wood. The longer it is and the skinnier it is, the bendier, if that makes sense. Like I said, I'm sure there's some law of physics to explain this, but I just want everyone to be aware of that when you're choosing the size of notebook that you want to use. Because sometimes I'll hear from people who will say, oh, my notebook is a little stiffer than I thought it would be. And sometimes that just has to do with the size of the notebook. This is a tiny notebook. It's going to end up, or it's not a notebook yet, it will be, but it's going to end up being a little bit bigger than business cards. It's the smallest size that I make. This is going to be an A5 notebook. See how much flop that has? There's so much more room for it to wiggle. Like there's physically room for it to move around in a way that's just not, there's just not space for it to move as well. So it's a function of the size and the thickness. So keep that in mind. If you have the option to choose thickness, if you're choosing a small notebook, you might want to go with a thinner leather. It might give you more wiggle room there. Or if you're going with a bigger notebook, you may want to choose the thicker leather so that it holds up well and that larger size gives you the wiggle room that you need. So just please be aware of that the sizing will definitely affect the softness and that degree of wiggle and flop that you could experience there. And that's going to be true for all kinds of leather. So aside from the vegetable tanned leathers, there's what we call oil tanned. And that's really a misnomer. It's not tanned with oil, but it is treated with oil-based treatments after it's been tanned at the tannery. And these are done in massive batches, so you have a great deal of color consistency. So when they're doing 100 hides of leather all in the same batch, they're all going to come out the same color. So that's really good if you want a super consistent color. Say you're a maker who buys, if you buy 100 hides at a time, you want them all to be the same color. The one thing about the oil tanned is that you get this sort of matte finish, and it does get scratched a little bit. You can leave marks on it, and those are usually considered desirable as long as you're not gouging in the leather. These small scratches are usually a good thing. This, because it is drum dyed, as I was describing in giant batches, the color permeates all the way through. So whereas the leather that I use starts out a buff color like this and then is dyed on the surface, like here's a piece of a pink notebook that I've kind of cut apart, a little experiment piece. And if I cut through, you can see here that inside is still that buff leather color. The outside's pink because that's where I've dyed it, but inside, if we cut through, you'll see the raw leather. So that means that it's not, it's not permeated all the way through, but I can scratch it here, and it does permeate through enough that even with deliberate scratches, I've caused some scarring here for sure, but it's still pink. So I'd have to really gouge super hard to get down to the buff leather underneath. So that's just something to be aware of. A little bit of trivia is that underneath, it's the original buff leather color if you're going with a vegetable tanned option, because the dye is sitting on the surface rather than having been drum dyed all the way through. Now, some limitations that go along with oil tanned leather is that you cannot change the color after the fact. I can never take this and dye it pink. It's just not going to work. Chemically and just optically, the pink dye is never going to overtake this black dye. So this is going to be black forever and ever and ever. It's a permanent dye. So that's something to think of. When they're doing these big batches, they're doing them typically going to be in classic colors, black, brown, tan. They're not usually going to do 100 hides of a bright pink, just because that's what we would call a fashion color. It's not one of the classic neutrals. So you're going to have more limited color options with this. It's super durable and it can be really handsome in the right settings, but it will have some limitations. It also cannot be carved or tooled or stamped in the same way that a vegetable tan leather can. So where on a lot of my notebooks you can get initials stamped in it or things like that added to it, that's not going to be an option on anything made from an oil tanned leather, just because the way the finish is made, the leather won't take those kind of markings anymore. Another term that you will probably hear, and this is related to the oil tanned leathers, is pull up. So this is very similar to the oil tan, except it's a finish that allows you, when you pull on it, the texture and the color lightens a little bit. And then it goes right back to the way it was. And you might see this like maybe on a couch or some upholstery or a tote bag. So this finish is something you might see. So if you see something called pull up, that's what it's referring to, that there will be some slight color and texture changes when the leather is pulled on like that. In other characteristics, it's pretty much the same as oil tanned. It's dyed all the way through and has the same limitations in terms of color choices and the ability to stamp and all that, because it won't accept dye or stamping after the fact. It's going to be the color that it came from the tannery. Another kind of finish that you will see sometimes is called a milled finish, milled leather. So this is a hide. It probably started out looking something like this, just the way it came off the cow, nice and smooth. And then it was tumbled in basically what is more or less an industrial laundry dryer without any heat, but just a giant tumbler. And it takes all those previously stiff skin fibers there and breaks them up at the surface. So it's still really durable. It's really tough. It's not going to rip or anything. It doesn't hurt it that way, but it does create this pebbly texture on top because it's broken those fibers down a little bit, and it makes it very soft. So you would see this for purses or sometimes upholstery, something that you want to have some give to it, and it has a really luxurious feeling suede sort of back to it. But the thing is that it becomes so floppy that you wouldn't want to make a book out of this unless you're doing something with pockets or you're doing multiple layers that will build up a level of stiffness that will, give it some structure. Because on its own, it's really soft. It feels really, delightful and kind of mushy in your hands. It's really soft, but not suitable for turning into something that you want to maybe stand on its own on a bookshelf. So just keep that in mind. If you see this texture, that's how it got it. It got it by being tumbled around and, kind of those fibers at the top broken down a little bit so that it has give to it. So something else that you will want to think about is the thickness of the leather. And I'm going to do a separate video on this because I'm introducing a new weight of leather. This is an undyed notebook. This is a field note size, and you can see that it has darkened a little bit just because this is the original color, but this has darkened simply from light exposure, just being in my workshop, and also from being conditioned several times. So I've had this one kind of as a demonstration notebook for a little while, so you can see it's already got a little bit of patina on it. It's changed a lot from when it was this color to start out with. But leather is measured in ounces. So it's how heavy a given dimension of leather is. So this is what I typically use. It's called a 6-ounce leather. So it's 6 to 7 ounces usually. And you can see how thick it is. And this gives you a nice, sturdy, book-like cover. And so you can see that it has softened up a bit, even softer than the original leather started out. See how this has a lot of spring back? Just because it's been handled a lot, because it's been conditioned several times, it is much softer, and that's a characteristic of most leather. The more it's handled, the more it's conditioned, the floppier, the softer it's going to be. So this is the 6 ounce, and I'm also introducing a 4 to 5 ounce leather. This is from a new batch, that's why the color's lighter here. But you can hold them side by side, and you'll see the difference in the thickness there. And again, this is where you might want to consider if you're wanting different sizes, you might want to choose a thickness of leather based on the size of notebook that you're getting, because the thinner it is, again, as we demonstrated earlier, the floppier it's going to be, the more bend it will have available to you, so you can, kind of move it all around in a way that you can't necessarily on a thicker, smaller piece of leather. So those are some things to be aware of, the different kinds of leather, vegetable tanned versus oil tanned, and the color options, surface dyed versus drum dyed, smooth versus milled, 6 to 7 ounce compared to 4 to 5 ounce. There's a lot of options there, but hopefully this gives you the tools you need to make an educated decision so that when you work with a maker to create something custom for you, you get what you're expecting and you know what they're talking about. Because sometimes we use vocabulary that, we talk about, a 6 ounce pull-up leather. Well, that might not mean anything to anybody. But now you know what those terms mean, and you can make an educated decision about what you want to buy and the kind of notebook or leather item that you want to carry on a regular basis to meet your needs. So if you've got questions, let me know. Mention them in the comments or send me an email, and I will be happy to work out an answer for you. I'll do my best to keep educating everybody on the world of leather, so let me know how I can help. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.